Okay.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You were just asked whether this has been a more robust or weaker recovery than the ones, I guess, post-World War II, including the ones in the 1980s, and I think testified that this was a weaker recovery. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, Congressman.
But would it also be fair to say that in 2008, this country confronted the worst economic crisis and collapse that we've experienced in the history of the Republic, with the exception of the Great Depression?
Yes, that's right, Congressman.
Okay. And the economy since 2009 under this administration is moving in the right direction based on any reasonable, objective economic measure. Wouldn't that be correct?
So the GDP has been growing since the summer of since the summer of that year. Yes, Congressman.
Well, let's take a look at some other numbers. So 6 million private sector jobs have been created over the last several years. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so, Congressman. Depends on the point at which you start that tally.
Okay. And I believe 100,000 manufacturing jobs have been created in America over the last few years. Is that right?
That may be. I don't know that offhand.
Okay. And I think unemployment, the unemployment rate is at or near its lowest level in the last 4 years. Is that right?
Yes, Congressman. I think that's right.
Okay. And home prices are rising at the fastest rate in the last 6 years. Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman.
Okay. And I think home purchases are up approximately 50% at this point in time.
They're rising a good deal. I don't know the exact number.
Okay. And I think we've also reduced the deficit by about $2.5 trillion in the last several years. Is that correct?
So we've not tried to do a calculation like that. How much has been accomplished so far depends very much on the point in time at which one starts counting and the benchmark one is comparing to. So we have not done that calculation ourselves.
Okay. So it seems, though, based on any reasonable economic measure, the economy is clearly moving in the right direction. The question has been asked a few times today: is there any economic benefit to balancing the budget? I'd like to ask a different question. Is there any economic benefit to stimulating economic growth in the country at this moment in time?
Yes, Congressman, there is.
And what would be the best way, in your estimation, as you've examined this question, to stimulate economic growth?
Well, so the ultimate choices depend on people's judgments, your judgments, on behalf of your constituents as to what you think the government should and shouldn't be doing. But we have said that we think cuts in taxes or increases in spending that put money into people's hands where it is spent quickly can provide a crucial boost to the demand for goods and services and encourage businesses to hire workers, which then gives them income, which allows them to spend more, and so on.
And you've indicated that the best way, perhaps, to increase consumer demand is to make sure that we increase the amount of money that's placed into the hands of low-income or modest Americans. Is that right? I
think in terms of the bang for the buck, lower-income Americans will tend to spend a larger share of extra money they get or a reduction in taxes that they enjoy.
Would it be reasonable to conclude that an increase in the minimum wage that was proposed recently by the President has been advocated by others, which would therefore place a greater degree of money in the hands of low-income or modest-income New Yorkers, would lead to an increase in consumer demand and therefore be good for the economy?
We have not studied a particular increase in the minimum wage carefully, Congressman. I think there are various specs at work. I think you're right. Some people would get paid more, which they could then spend and would presumably spend. It's also true, though the evidence is mixed, we think there would probably be a small reduction in employment because the cost of workers would go up. We have not tried to work through those effects or others. It also, of course, depends on how much the minimum wage is increased and how the increase compares with what is the current minimum wage in many states. And in many states, of course, there's a different minimum wage, a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum.
Now, the greatest reduction in employment, at least that we could possibly face in the short term, would be to allow the sequestration to take place. Is that correct? We'd lose about 750,000 jobs in your estimation?
I think, again, the Congress could examine a range of fiscal policy options, but of the things that are about to happen under current law that you all talk about a lot, taking away the sequester would have a noticeable effect in our judgment on output and jobs over the rest of this year.
Now, you mentioned that a loss of confidence in the government's ability to manage its affairs could trigger a sort of fiscal crisis where our ability to borrow at affordable rates is reduced. Is that right?
Yes.
And would it be reasonable that confronting a fiscal cliff in January, a potential debt ceiling default in March, sequestration, debt ceiling default in February, sequestration in March, government shutdown in April, another potential debt ceiling default in May, could perhaps shake the confidence of some investors in our ability to deal with our responsibilities?
And we think that the perennial crisis mode of fiscal policy over the past few years is reducing people's confidence. How big an effect that is, we